November 3rd, Route Pack 5, we went with 3 Mark 83s that we carried. And then I flew with him again on 6 November, and we went up with 6 Mark 82s. Let's see, 255. Between we flew with MiG Cap and Route Pack 5. So I flew with Olds twice, I guess is all. Was born and raised in Powell, Wyoming, graduated from high school there, went to the University of Wyoming for 1 year. That would have been school year 1958-59. In those days, if it was a land-grant school, you had to be in either Army or Air Force ROTC, so I chose Air Force ROTC. And then I got my appointment to the Air Force Academy, starting in 59, graduating with a class of 1963. And then was in the Air Force for 21 years, retiring finally in 1984. Did pilot training at Williams Air Force Base, pilot training class 65F, graduating there in March of 1965, and I got my assignment out of pilot training. My last flight at Eglin, and the time period we're talking about is 1966, so again, it's a very early stages of the war. The other thing I'd say as a prelude to that is the total difference between people that were assigned to Da Nang flying the F-4 in country in support of primarily Army units, and those of us that were stationed in Thailand, we strictly flew what we call out of country missions. We, for whatever reasons, could not fly missions back over into South Vietnam. We either flew primarily into North Vietnam, or if the weather was bad or was a stand down, then we would support the efforts in Laos at the time. So we're talking about 1966. My last flight at Eglin Air Force Base was April 15th. My first combat flight, was at Udorn in Thailand in June of the 23rd of June. What happened in between there? There was some vacation, and then I had never been to basic survival. I've been to jungle survival, but I hadn't been to basic survival, and it was kind of a snafu. And then a bunch of us got all the way out to California, Travis Air Force Base, getting ready to take off, and all of a sudden they terminated our orders and made us go back through 3 weeks of basic survival instead. To go, and then we went over, so that's why there was the gap in there. And of course, at that stage, the Vietnam War was just beginning, and actually, when I got assigned to go overseas, the unit I went to was the 8th Attack Fighter Wing. The squadron I was involved in was a triple nickel. They were the first F-4 squadron in the entire Air Force. They had been originally stationed at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, and then they had deployed over in the fall of '65, originally to Okinawa, I believe it was, to maybe Kadena, and then they got sent then from there on down to Thailand. And then as they started completing their missions is when the people like myself got called in, and of course in those stages it was strictly as replacements, as individuals, not as a unit type deployments. In those days, and again, a clear contrast from capabilities in the equivalent 1966 versus Desert Shield, Desert Storm, or the most recent Iraqi situation, we basically had to be Day VFR. We did not have any electronic. They were just starting to have passive electronic gear that could tell when a radar was starting to look at you, but we were basically seeing a void. So if the visibility was very poor or anything else, we had some guys press it, and sometimes got shot down as a result, because it was just, you just didn't have all this other gear to warn you when somebody was either a radar was looking at you, or somebody was actually firing either triple air missiles. So I was very fortunate because of the situation I was in. After that time period, once the Air Force got set up, and instead of the way the replacements went through, it was called an RTU, and people that would get checked out in the F-4 would only have maybe about 100 hours in the airplane before they got assigned to combat. Whereas by me going through Davis-Monthan and then at Eglin, I had about 200 hours in the airplane, so I felt like I was much more comfortable, in knowing the systems and the capability of the airplanes. In combat, you have the lead of the two airplanes. 1 and 2 are together, and then 3 and 4 are back here, sometimes a mile or 2 out, because everybody's purpose, of course, when you start dropping the bombs, and then lead responsibilities to get you in there. But really, the 2, 3, and 4 are to protect protect the integrity of the formation, and that's why you have 3 and 4 sitting out here. So that's in daytime. Now, like nighttime, as I already referred to, because of running into each other and all, you'd have 2 airplanes, rather than a 4-ship. After the original triple Nicker, both front and back seaters and triple nickel left, we had a period of time of about 2 months where we could only launch 2 4-ships a day. But that's all the people we had, and they were even bringing some people from South Vietnam and TUI just to augment us over in Thailand. So it was kind of a weird type mission, and so that was the first mission. And then later on in the walk with, I see RB-66s, of course, which was our reconnaissance airplane as well. And I flew, especially when I was at UDORN, flew an awful lot of those. Later on, then, not while I was there, because I got there in June, and then the requirements. If you were stationed in Thailand flying missions over North Vietnam, a completed tour was 100 missions. So I was able to get 100 missions by the middle of December. Then I was home for Christmas. The record at our base was one individual came in and got 100 missions in 117 days. Nighttime missions were a little bit different because at night they would shoot flares and I mean tracers and all that, and you could actually see it. Of course, we were all flying. Once we took off and crossed generally the Mekong River, knew we were in enemy territory, then we would go black out. We'd be blacked out, and then you're using altitude separation again between the 2 airplanes just to avoid it, and then the lead airplane would flare. And of course, depending on your target, so you'd see tracers coming at you there. The one scariest mission I remember, and this will take a little bit maybe to explain it, but I was trying to find the exact date in here, but it was probably late summer, early fall. The F-105s were being targeted by the MiGs, and of course they could tell the difference between the 105 and the F4, and the 105s were doing the damage, but plus they knew they were not good air-to-air against the MiGs, and so they started targeting them. And so then somebody down in Saigon, down in 7th Air Force, got the brilliant idea that, okay, instead of having just a flight of 105s coming in, we'll put another flight of F4s to come in to fly chase. So basically we had 8 airplanes. So the one mission I remember in particular, because we got fired at a couple times by SAM missiles, but the F4s, we had to have different tankers because we were using, of course, the way they refuel now with the boom and coming in and all that. The F-105s were still using Krogan drogue, I think, at the time. Plus they altitude wise, fully loaded, they couldn't get much above 10 or 15,000 feet because we were up at 3,000 foot. But anyway, we took off from different bases, and we had our drop off times with the tankers, and then we kind of joined up, and then the 105, of course, was designed 50s, I guess, as a for the European scenario in Terminal Bombay carrying a nuclear weapon. Well, in Vietnam, that's where they carried their fuel tanks. But I mean, it was just aerodynamically, it was such a smooth airplane. And I mean, they would drop down. Only had 1 engine, we had 2. But I mean, at low altitude, I mean, it just whistle Dixie. Whereas the F4 is designed for high altitude. And so when we got down and started chasing around, I mean, it took all with us just to be able to keep up with 2 J-79 engines. But our mission that time was in the Hanoi area, kind of northwest, and it was Stud Ridge that came down, that paralleled the Red River that came down, and we were. If we're going primarily after SAMs or whatever, but the one vivid memory I'll have till the day I die was we had come down from the northwest towards Hanoi, this gaggle of the airplanes, and we had turned back up Thud Ridge, and that particular airplane, we were flying number 4 in the formation, the F4, so we're kind of tailing Charlie. And as we turned back, and I can still remember looking over my left shoulder and seeing SAMs get fired at us, and the description that they looked like a flying telephone pole was very accurate. I mean, they were long, and you could see that coming in. And before I could see it and react and hit the mic button and everything else, the SAM, luckily was not guiding, or I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you, but then went under airplanes, probably missed us 500 foot or less underneath, and then went out about a mile or so, and then exploded. But I mean, it was just one of those things that, you know, if it had been our day, of course I wouldn't be here then. But that's one of the few times I remember. Of course, that was a daylight mission, St. Sam's. You know, you don't remember seeing tracers except primarily during night missions. So, and the same rules of engagement. You know, you don't just, you know, touch them. I mean, you know, sure, you wait till they offload maybe and hit a warehouse or something like that. But it's just, you know, just illustrated. Of course, the person that took a lot of this heat at the time was the Secretary of Defense, and that was McNamara. And that was, you know, I mean, he was doing a lot of control, micromanaging from the Pentagon from Washington, D.C. After dinner, you know, so we go to the bar and drink more. We can go back over to intelligence. Because, and the frag would always come in with your primary, your secondary, your tertiary targets. You know, and that's why sometimes I ended up in I mean, you never came home with orders. I mean, you always just, you know, either jettisoned it or you know, went to the Mugia, you know, the Mugia Pass, that area, and just where the dropped some more on the beach and where everything was all dug up anyway. This is in the days of the transition, and when we were short of air crews, because we just launched two four ships, and they were in the first ship and we were in the second one, and they were about probably 20-30 minutes ahead of us, and actually I think they turned north because they wanted to avoid Haiphong, and the weather was bad in the target area, and so they were coming back out and supposedly got hit just kind of very close to the shoreline there, as they were coming back out. And meanwhile, we were on a similar freight where they switched us over so we could hear it, and then we spent time looking for them, you know, but we're unsuccessful. So neither one of them were captured. They were MIA for a long time, and then finally status was changed to KIA. So they were never POWs. About that time, I can remember one day we came in early on for a morning mission, and intelligence would brief the activities of the day before, and I think there was one day, and maybe it was the day after that happened, maybe when 3 airplanes had gone down, and I knew crew members in all 3 of them, because like the one we had lost, plus there were two F-105s, but the 105s I'd known those pilots as well. That's one of these times when, you know, sorry, but that's why the idea of not sitting around and thinking about it for a long time, because it probably would have really got it. But I mean, as long as you're scheduled and you're flying and you keep that routine going, you know, then, you know, you just, you know, and you know, your attitude, you know, of course your faith in God comes about, and you know, it's soul-searching time from that standpoint as well. Or and just like this incident, or you know, the day when they fired the MiG they fired the SAM at us. You know, if you know, the good Lord wouldn't been looking after us and everything else, you just, I guess you got to take that kind of an attitude. Back when, of course, I was out of the Air Force then, but at Manhattan, the first division at Fort Riley had gone over en masse and came back. We had and from the Vietnam vets' perspective, it was probably the first time we had really been recognized and all that. There were a bunch of us that were involved, because we had the manager of the K-band radio station had gotten a banner that said Vietnam vets. And we had kind of a sizable contingent that were marching in, and as we came down Points Avenue, there were, we pulled some guys that were just watching us, and we had people that were, you know, 4 and 6 deep, I think, along Points Avenue. And then as of course, we were behind the regular Army troops coming down, but the ripple that started down there, and as I still tell the story, I kind of get shivers thinking about it. But just everybody was standing up, the applause, just kind of the ripple as we came down, and probably amongst us, not many dry eyes in the whole audience from that experience, which was very memorable.